at the end, if anyone wants to go back to any of the earlier set, of course, we could also go there. But I think we'll have our hands full with these three. What we're going to try to do this time is, when you ask a question, Melissa's going to bring you the mic, just so that the streaming people can hear it all. And then the people who are asked questions, if they would come up to the podium to speak into this mic, but also so they can be seen by the camera. Okay? So your duties are not over yet, but it will come soon. So let me open the floor. Don't all speak at once.
Okay,
yes, excellent. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Should I look into the camera?
No. You're disembodied as the questioner. Okay.
Especially for Maria Saveri.
Okay.
I was noticing Cefali's depiction of the progress of America definitely is in the style, as you proved, of Gusts or others. And there I see, I think, an iconography, and I'm asking you mainly, but all the art historians, that it's quite common, with a few exceptions, in the 19th century. The movement is from right to left, which is usually toward the west. I mean, that's implied. It's from light to darkness. There are a few exceptions there that I've seen, that it's actually from darkness to light. As the cameraman moves, there is, there is also light coming, more or less. I'm thinking about the star of the West takes its way. Something like that.
Lloyd said.
Yeah, right.
Emmanuel Lloyd said, yes.
Yes, that's right. Do you see a pattern there? And to what extent should that okay. Oh, okay. Better. Okay. To what extent? Not again. Does that entail also a racist statement? Because I think attached to the progress of civilization, because that's what it is, there is also, I think, again, I'm sorry, I'm insisting on this, but I think there is also a racist statement. I'm thinking in Gast, you see in the shadow, you see the Indians and the buffaloes running, right? And you see a deer in Lotz's painting that crosses the railway, which is, and basically there is no Melrose. Oh, okay, thank you. But there is also one by Leutzer. Yeah, not with the deer. Yeah. Leutzer is probably the one with the light in the west, actually. Okay, you see a pattern there.
So I believe that there is a double point of view of this painting, and if I understand correctly the question, in Cefali remarked this discussion from right to left is common in all the painting, in all narrative painting, but there is also this will to go to be near this idea of progress, because I think this is the central point. From the east, from the Wild West, because in the text we found the Wild West, the Dark West. So I think that for all these painters that are also soldiers, also young patriot, as we saw yesterday in the last evening. This is the most important point of view, in my opinion, for this painting. Also the because all this, in the case of Cefali, for example, this painting belongs to his a particular phase of activity. When he depicted this painting, he was involved in political battle. Instead, at the end of his artistic period of his activity, he decided to abandon, is correct, to go back in Calabria, to leave all these activity is dominated by this illusion, for example. Instead, at the end of his career, we don't have anything about this that I show you. We have only some subject taken from from countryside. This part of political subject is completely forgotten. Yeah. So I think.
Holding the microphone.
I don't know if it was clear.
Not working. I mean, I can ask a question. It's an iconographic question about Cepoli.
Mhm.
Maybe you said this and I missed it. Who is the male figure that's reclining and as you're looking at the painting, it's the lower right-hand corner?
The monk. The monk.
Oh, okay. It's the monk and he's holding a scroll and he's pointing.
Yeah. Can we see the mail? I tell you the mail.
It's
Yeah.
the same position. Okay.
Because
Okay.
yes,
so the church
I
is-
think
okay.
yes, it's the church.
That's what I was
In my opinion, is he represents this aversion, this anti-clericalism of the patriot, of
Okay.
Italian patriot, because
Somewhere you should.
goes on. Again.
Oh, right there. Okay. Oh, it says Inquisition.
I think there is
Okay.
another.
Yeah.
Yes. It goes on.
There it is.
Another. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think Inquisition is clear to it is an allegory of this anti-clericalism of these patriots, I think, because we have another drawing by Cefali that I didn't show you today because I didn't have time to show you, but it's more clear that is that symbolizes this aversion towards Catholic religion.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
This reminds me of something. I think it's Nast again, about the fall of Pius IX, who draws it's not Nast, that he falls from his. No, it's 1870. I mean, when Rome is conquered. So I don't remember, but there is a pope falling from the chair. It's not the same position as this, but
similar?
similar. And there are some Italian engravers also who depict the March of the Mille, and they have monks also. I mean, there is this contrast between the friars who support Garibaldi, and on the other hand, monks and priests who instead are falling.
As the early modern person, I'll just add that the figure also resembles the Caravaggio St. Paul in Santa Maria del Popolo. So it turns over the illumination of Christianity. Now the illumination is despite conservative Christianity. But let's go to another question.
I just wanted to ask you to expand a bit more on the Victoria Woodhall section.
Okay.
Very interested in that because I was wondering, first of all, if you would tell us again what year it was that the Woodhall sisters came to Italy, and did they meet with the painter, or did he just hear about them? And also, it's kind of surprising because by the time he painted that picture, she had already left the United States and more or less in disgrace and gone to Britain. And I'm just kind of curious as to how, are you speculating that he is idealizing her, or do you know that for a fact, or what?
Okay. this moment of my research, I didn't find anything about this direct relationship between the artist, between Morelli and Victoria Hoodle. I want to research more about this. It is so curious that Victoria Hoodle appears in this painting in a context so far, because when I studied Andrea Cefali, I studied above all is Risorgimento painting, you know, and when I saw this painting, I was wondering myself why there are so many women in this painting. Why? When I found a document, a text, is biographical, is first biographical, and I read Vittoria Vandalle. Wow, Vittoria Vandalle, who is it? Who is she? And I don't know anything else about the popularity of Victoria Hoodle in Naples in those years at the moment.
But you said that he started the painting in 72.
Yeah.
So she's active in 72, and she's in Washington, and so he doesn't finish it till 80.
Yeah. He started to the
painting in 72, and that's when she ran, and did, what year was it again that she came to Italy?
No.
Her sister?
Because, a sister, Tennessee Claflin, went in Naples in the early 1910, if I remember, 1910. See, it's so strange because I think one of the questions that I have to search to answer is who is this American committee that asked Cefali to paint? It's so difficult because there are a lot of contact. But in the following years, not at I don't know anything about this, anything in the textual source at the moment.
Yeah, we have three hands. Let's start with Adam, and then we'll go to Leonardo, and then to Lindsay.
I hope it's clear.
I don't know who this is for.
Hi, this is from Maria while she's up here.
Okay.
I was just curious, very straightforward, what was going on in the left corner of the picture in your estimation, the lower left?
I'm looking for a paint, please. Okay, I show you a lot of that.
Yeah.
Okay, something about this corner.
The lower left.
This.
The animal scenery there. Yeah.
A frog and snake. Yes, I think it is a frog. This and the snake that disturbing these rays. Huh? Do you think? I think a frog, no? In my opinion, no, in my opinion, there are also some iconographical details that he took from the traditional to something of to refer to evil, to disturb these rays of freedom, I think. Because I found another word to explain this picture, but in my opinion it's pastiche, because it is a pastiche, an iconographical pastiche. I don't know how I can translate this pastiche. Yeah, because combining so different elements.
I can add there that Durer's Night, Death, and the Devil has the horse leaping over not a snake but a lizard. So this is an old iconographical motif of, the power, ethical power triumphing over.
Yeah, I was just struck by the two animals together there.
I don't know exactly, because I think at this and a classical motif, but I don't know. But thank you for the
Next, and I see two more back here, so this is great.
I have a question for Marina.
Okay.
I was very interested in that comment you made about Henry James referring to Nencioni as an Italian acquaintance. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, and what is your explanation for this, the fact that James dismissed what was really an exception in the Italian experience of most Americans. There are only very few examples of that kind of really meaningful relationship between an American and Italian. Story certainly is one of those, except Story and Nencioni. William Dean Howells, when he was the American consul to Venice, developed a very strong relationship with an Italian. So what do you make of that? The way in which James treats that relationship.
Well, James, I believe, was mostly writing for an English and American public. He was not interested. He was building, first of all, the modernist vision of art and literature, and trying to detach that vision from stories and his epoch. But he will also, as Melissa has shown and other critics have shown, was getting rid of women artists as well. And he was not interested in Italian criticism. There are two reasons. One, he thought that Story was not a good critic, a good writer, and probably thought that Nencioni was not a good critic either. But he never says that. My idea is that he was not interested. He met Nencioni at Violet Page's house, where also Sargent was introduced to Signorini. That was another period. I didn't enter it. But what is relevant is that Nencioni is missing. He uses the letter Story wrote about, the autobiographical letter that he provided Nencioni for one of the articles he was writing on his work. But that was it. It was only useful. And I believe he started a line of reading of American-Italian relations that is still going on, where there is not enough interest into the Italian side of Italian-American relations, neither on the part of the Americans and on the part of the Italians, because they are learning from the Americans to look at themselves from their point of view. I believe that that point of view should be changed.
My question is for you, Marina, so I encourage you to stay there. I was interested, as you could tell from my own talk, where I was talking about the relationship between text and image. Mm-hmm. And I was delighted to hear you mention that Nencioni is a critic who seems to be collaborating in some way, shape, or form with Signorini and other artists. And I wonder if you can speak to this collaboration or conversation that the writers and artists are having in your work about issues of republicanism or...
Yeah, anything. I'm a modernist as a scholar, mm-hmm. and I worked on Goethe's and Picasso and their relationship. So this is my field, more or less. But I have not dealt in depth with this particular group, mm-hmm. or in the relationship between Nencioni and Signorini, because everything is, on the one hand, in the essays or articles Signorini publishes, in journals and everywhere, where he theorizes about the macchia. And in Antoni's criticism of the macchia, because he writes a lot, he does not understand much of the macchia. But what he does is really, in his criticism, is always find an equivalent for the artwork in painting. For instance, Whitman, the wound dresser, one of the poems, he reads it as a Rembrandt, Rembrandtian representation of a war scene. And it is more Signorini than Nencioni that elaborates for painting the translation from literature to painting. And that is quite interesting, but I've not gotten into it enough. Actually, I got, all this was a surprise for me because I'd been reading Nencioni mostly in connection with Whitman and not with Signorini. And I had to go to Florence to read Signorini's correspondence and Nencioni's papers because nothing has been published yet.
I was interested in particular because this Scuola dei 25, it's a group of painters, but you have Cesare Pascarella and other poets. It's a group that's very much seemingly similarly together made up of artists and writers. So it seems they're inheriting something from this tradition.
Yeah, what about Vedder and the Macchiaioli? It is quite interesting to know that Vedder learned a lot from the Macchiaioli. But what about the Macchiaioli? How did they receive Vedder? What kind of conversation was there between them? What they passed to one another? That is another question that is worth...
Yeah, I think Adrian, you had your hand up next anyway, Adrian. So.
I had my hand up because that jumped out at me instantly as the Alexander mosaic.
Wait, no, come on. Yeah, and talk about your macchioli.
Tell us that first and then make your observation about this.
Well, no, I'll talk to you about that later. The question is, how much did the Macchiaioli learn from Vedder? I had a section in that of the talk, and I took it out. I think there was some overlap, but of course they were painting first, and because they're really only 1859 to about 65, and most of the works that Vedder and Coleman painted were from about 1863 onward. So the Macchiaioli had already created a body of work and produced a kind of aesthetic philosophy before Vedder and Coleman were really ensconced. But there are some examples of, I think, specific works. I mean, I don't have them here, but I think they're specific works that show Ussi, for example, painting a figure that looks exactly like the lost mind of Vedder's. So there's some examples like that where there's some iconographic similarities between the two schools. And the problem is that in the literature that I've read so far, Vedder is almost never discussed and Coleman is never mentioned. And when the name Coleman is mentioned, it's Enrico Coleman. So you have to make sure that you're using, assessing the right Coleman. And the worst part of it is that the British Charles Coleman lived, wait for it, at 33 Via Margutta. So, yes, it's true. Yes.
I think Sergio was next for a question. Yes.
I had a question for Lisa Harris about your paper. You were trying to discuss similarities in the two capitals, and as far as I understand, both of them had this common ground about the dark side of Africa next door in Rome and Washington as the Congo of America. But I wanted to ask you, why did you pick the two different sets of photographs, which are totally I mean, very far distance, either in technique, because if I understand daguerreotypes from the 1846 and the 1910, so more than 60 years apart, so they're different in technique and they're different also in their final destination, because we have 400 photographs in a printed book, which, if I understand correctly, deals with social problems in the Campagna Romana, and therefore is aimed to a kind of social inquiry about the conditions, where we don't know anything. I mean, at least I don't know anything about the original purpose of those 4 photographs taken in Washington. So I think that I want to ask you, why did you pick those 2 different examples as paradigmatic to your point? Because otherwise I would say that your point could be stronger if you compared photographs that were similar in about the context of the production and also about the number, because 4 photographs taken by Plumb are not quantitative enough to build up on discourse on that, whereas you have 400 photographs on the other side.
You raise exactly the right point, and it's sort of the Achilles heel of the presentation, in the sense that the Roman material is something that I've been working on for a very long time, and something with which I'm very familiar, and trying to get my head around the 400 photographs as part of my own book project. And it was really only thanks to the invitation to participate in this conference that I began to think about the Washington example. And in my thinking, where I started the project, when I thought, here's the conference, I was ready to participate, and I thought more actually about Washington and land reclamation. I was going in my mind with the fact that both cities had this issue of swampland, which was in fact where my research into this concept of the wasteland came into play. That's where it all began. But then in looking more at photography of Washington, D.C., and I was, as I said, there's no shortage of photographs that I could choose, and certainly if I think about developing this project for an eventual publication, if we are able to do that, your point about choosing a similar moment in history around the turn of the 20th century will be more effective, absolutely. But I found this photographs set called These Earliest Photographic Views of Washington, D.C., and I was intrigued by, as I think art historians tend to be, about origins, about where things begin. Here was the first photographer within a commercial studio, the first known photographs of the city. And I thought, well, what does this tell us about what were some of the initial thinkings about the capital? So I guess it was a way for myself to get my mind thinking about the ways in which photographs are being used to represent the city. And the fact that there's only 4 in the set, that's just what has survived by the fact that they were daguerreotypes and they break easily. And in fact, they were only unearthed in the 70s, or they came to light in somebody's collection. So let's say it's, for me, a starting point.
Of Rome.
Exactly.
So the
but
earliest specimens.
What then I found more compelling was the way this comparison of both cities to Africa and to Congo and to slavery for very different reasons. I mean, there's a colonial history with Rome, and there's this chip on the shoulder about being the Rome of, or rather the Africa of Europe. There's a lot more rhetoric there that's different from the slavery rhetoric. But I also wanted to look at the way in which social justice is of issue in Italy, and it's more of an internal question. I mean, slavery is an internal question too, but there's the people who are living in the countryside are not slaves, but it's the persistence of a latifundi or a feudal system that the fact that it persists until 1910 is shocking. But you're absolutely right. A stronger argument will be made later with similar time frame.
I think the next one's over there. Yeah. I have a question for Marina. Mine is just a curiosity because the resemblance of the portraits of Whitman and Garibaldi is actually striking. Of course, as it's already been stressed, this pose was actually standard from the Renaissance on to represent people of authority, culture, military, political, or whatever. But I mean, I never worked on this, but is there any evidence that Garibaldi somehow knew about Whitman's role as the bard of American democracy, because on the ideological level, I mean, they are actually sharing a number of things. So is there any trace, as far as you know, that Garibaldi was interested somehow in Whitman's poetry or cultural role as the hero of American democracy?
Come on back up,
I've not had time to look into that. What I was looking into really was about early photographs or drawings of Garibaldi in his red shirt that might have inspired the young American Whitman. Because he had been in South America, had become a hero already, and he had adopted the red shirt there. And I don't know enough of the what kind of communication there was between the Latin countries of the Americas and New York, and what kind of prince crossed the isthmus and got into the United States. That's something I'd like to find out and ask the help of whoever has worked in it.
The democratic revolutions in Latin America. So
Yes. He also wrote when Brazil finally became a republic. He wrote to the President of the Republic of Brazil to congratulate him. But I doubt that Garibaldi knew about Whitman, though he might have read Nencioni's articles in the most famous Italian papers. One of them was an illustrated paper. Oh, yeah, I have a question for you. Can I ask a question? Are there any other pictures that you know of the Campagna Romana that are earlier, late 19th century? Because, what strikes me about the pictures you showed and the book is that they seem to be continuing the debate about ideal and real that was started with the new realist painters against the neoclassical idealists, and they are continuing. And for instance, William Wetmore's story has wonderful stories about the Campagna where everybody seems happy. And I was wondering, and he visited the Campagna until very late in his life. He died in 1995. Are there any pictures that show a less idyllic vision of the Campagna?
That's a great question. There are definitely loads of photographs of the Campagna. In the 1890s, Giuseppe Primoli, for example, goes out there a lot, and there are these wonderful photographs of le gare fotografiche of him and his friends, but they're of the idealized sort that you're describing, or they're of the interest of archaeologists, Thomas Ashby, Esther van Diemen, who are going out there to document. And those views are not so much idyllic. Well, I suppose they are picturesque, but they are fascinated by the ruins. However, on their travels to the various country locations where there are the aqueducts in particular, in the case of Ashby and Van Diemen, they do tend to stop and see on the side of the road groups of peasants with a capital P, and then they take photographs, but they are more of they're not of the same social reform-minded kind, but more of the idealized type. And in fact, when Karen was mentioning the women with the spinning attrezzi, that is a trope that recurs time and again. What's so striking to me about this example of Latina Telos is precisely this social activism. I don't see that in earlier photographs. It's not surprising to me that the painters are beginning to have these kinds of sentiments that you're speaking about, because Nino Costa, for them, is also a huge mentor figure and the painters associated in the generation before the Venticinque of In Arte Libertas, which is like a Roman equivalent of the Macchiaioli, sort of, but they were active in more similar years. But those are painters who similarly go out to the Roman countryside. The important thing to note is one photographic development that happens in 1888, which is the Kodak box camera, which makes photography much easier and more portable to go out into the countryside. It makes it cheaper and easier for the average person to use. So there's a big shift in photography between anything prior to the 1880s and anything after, because before that people had to have that heavy 4x5 cameras with the big tripods, and the equipment is a lot more cumbersome to be traveling out to the countryside. Yeah.
I think, alas, okay, I'll leave 3 minutes, and then I have to wrap it up because we're going to need to go. Let's a quick one from Adam.
Me too.
I really liked and appreciated and was struck by your sort of fascinating and brilliant observation about the way in which the reproduction of the halftone sort of approximates or becomes like pictorialist photography. And I was just wondering if you could maybe say a bit more about that. And I was curious in particular whether that you sort of attribute that to some degree to the photomechanical reproduction process of the halftone itself, or to the juxtaposition with actual pictorialist photographs, to some degree with the accompaniment of text, or something else altogether. Perhaps you could just elaborate.
I can imagine that a pictorialist photographer, if we were in the 1910, for example, would actually be upset with my looking at them now in retrospect as being similar, because what Edward Steichen and Stieglitz and Casebier and these other exponents of photography as an art with a capital A, what they were trying to do was really make the case for the uniqueness of the print. Many of them were hand-touched, for example, or they were printed in different papers with different chemicals that had different colors. They weren't just black and white. They were sepia or blue or greenish or any other number of colors. But the fact is that 100 years on, in reproduction, looking through this book, Latina Tellus, there are pages where, unless it's written, like photograph or paint, I cannot tell what I'm looking at, because everything has been reduced to these pixels. So it's a problem of reproduction that has come about with time. I think the pictorialists were probably not happy about halftone reproductions, although they were fascinated with print techniques and printing in general, in the same way that a contemporary artist like Richard Benson is today, in the very art of photographic printing. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's something that's very striking about this book, because it is so difficult to tell the difference between painting and photography in this particular instance.
You sort of responded already to my question.
Okay. I think I'd better wrap it up. Of course, we can continue this discussion, most of us at dinner. I have 5 quick things I need to tell you, okay? See if I can remember them all. The first is that we're going to meet at 6, which is only 10 minutes from now, by the front gate of this building to walk the 2 minutes up the street to the museum for our tour, which should begin at 6. So let's be prompt about that. You'll be there already. We'll take everyone up. I also want to say that we'll meet again at the gate, let's say at 10 minutes to 8, to head off for dinner, those of us who are going to dinner at Scarpone. That's 2 things. The third thing I wanted to do was to just make sure that everyone who has assisted in this knows how grateful the 3 of us are, Daniela, Melissa, and myself. I want to call out to Amelia and to Karen from the Smithsonian. I want to call out to Lindsay and to Peter and to Anne and to Stefano in particular here at the American Academy. I want to use John as my stand-in for the Terra as a whole. It's just been great, I think, and we can continue to talk about that at dinner. But thanks so much to everyone involved in that way. The last two things I want to do are to say first that Melissa and I have had preliminary conversations with an editor at Penn State University Press, not to publish a proceedings of this conference or the one coming up in Washington, but to think about a volume that might expand from some of, or perhaps all of these papers, who knows. It's still a very preliminary discussion, and it won't really reach fruition until after next fall's conference, because if we do this, it will be something that we'll try to incorporate papers from both conferences. And that leads me to my last thing, which is just quickly to alert everyone here, and perhaps also via the web, to the Course of Empires, American Fascination with Classical and Renaissance Italy, 1760 to 1970, which Melissa mentioned early on. That's the companion conference to this that'll take place at the Smithsonian American Art Museum in October 20th and 21st, right, of 2017, so just over a year from now. I won't even right now read the description of this companion conference, partly because we're still working on it, but I can tell you that it will focus more particularly on the imperial element in all of this network of Italian and American culture, that it will go later in date up into the post-war period, and that we should have a call for papers to be issued in early December, and that the deadline for submissions will be in early March, just after the 1st of March. So I think with that, we should wrap up proceedings here, give everyone time to get ready for our trip to the museum. Thank you all so much.